Most people think the desert is quiet at night, but sometimes that silence isn't empty. It feels alive, like something is holding its breath, watching, waiting. Tonight, you're about to hear 3 scary night SkinWalker horror stories. Every one of them is real, verified through public records, witness accounts, and first-hand experiences from people who never imagined encountering something so unnatural. Some names have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves? Absolutely true. If these stories make the hair on your neck stand up, hit that like button. It helps more horror lovers find this channel. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because tonight, you're part of our horror family. I want to know where my fellow thrill seekers are listening from. And don't forget to subscribe. Every subscription fuels this channel, helping me bring you even more true, chilling stories that refuse to stay in the dark. The first thing I remember is the smell. Wet leaves and hot metal. My heater fighting the cold. My windshield wipers smearing rain into fog. And that sour, earthy Appalachia smell that clings to everything in late fall. It was after midnight when I left the plant outside Bluefield, and the mountains were doing what they always do at night, hiding their faces and letting the road pretend it's the only way through. I'd been taking the same route home since I was 22. Old Route 52, down past the closed gas station with the plywood windows, through a stretch of tight bends where the guardrail is always rusting, and then the long straight where the valley opens enough for fog to settle like a second ground. You learn the road by the way your headlights catch things, mailboxes, leaning, a sagging porch, the flash of creek water when the rain's high. My truck was a beat-up Ranger with a whine in the steering column and a floor mat that never fully dried. The cab smelled like cold coffee and the rubber of work boots. A little picture of my daughter was tucked into the sun visor. Her gap-toothed smile from last summer, before her mom and I decided space meant separate addresses. I hadn't been sleeping much since then. Nights were long, the kind of long where your thoughts keep walking around the room even when you tell them to sit down. The rain had been steady all evening, not hard, just constant. The kind that turns everything the color of old pennies. Fog kept pooling in the hollers, and my beams cut a narrow tunnel through it, making the trees on either side look like a wall of dark, wet ribs. About 10 miles from town, I passed one of those abandoned places that always look worse in headlights. A cabin set back from the road. Tin roof collapsed on one side, porch half gone. A couch still sitting under the overhang, like someone had tried to wait out the end of the world. The windows were black, no light, no movement, just rot and silence. And then, right after the curve where the creek runs close to the shoulder, I saw a shape. At first I registered it as road debris, something the rain had dragged down. A trash bag maybe, or a dead deer hunched wrong. But as my truck came closer, the shape resolved into a person. They were crouched on the shoulder, back toward the road, head down as if they'd dropped something and were searching for it in the wet gravel. No reflectors, no hazard lights, no car anywhere. Just a human form folded small against the edge of the pavement. My foot eased off the gas before I even decided to. You see someone on the roadside in these mountains, and your brain reaches for the same answers every time. Car trouble, a drunk walking home, somebody's kid doing something dumb. I didn't want to stop. Not really. It was too late. too empty. But I slowed, because that's what your conscience does when you're tired. The moment my headlights fully caught them, they stood up. It wasn't dramatic. That's what makes it hard to describe. They just rose, too smooth, too unhurried, like they weren't surprised I was there. Like they'd been waiting for the exact second my speed dropped. And they were taller than I expected. Not giant tall, just tall enough that my mind stumbled, recalibrating. Their limbs looked long under a dark jacket that hung loose and wet. The rain made the fabric cling in places and balloon in others. Then their head turned toward my truck. Not the way you'd turn if you were startled. Not quick. Not defensive. It was a slow pivot that didn't match their shoulders, as if the neck moved independently and the rest of the body didn't bother following. I didn't see a face. The fog and rain flattened everything into gray. But I felt the direction of their attention the way you feel a flashlight beam hit your skin. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself, don't stop. I told myself, don't make this a story you have to explain. I pressed the gas, and the Rangers surged forward. The figure slid out of the headlight tunnel into darkness. For a second, I caught them in the passenger side mirror. Just a black, upright smear against fog. And then the road curved, and they were gone. I tried to breathe like normal. 2 minutes later, I heard something outside my truck. A sound on the passenger side, low and rhythmic, like footsteps on wet gravel keeping pace. Not scraping, not tapping, more like a dull, steady thump that rose and fell with my speed. I glanced at the passenger window. Nothing but rain trails and my own faint reflection. The dark beyond the glass looked thick enough to hold a person upright without showing them. The sound stayed with me. When I accelerated, it quickened. When I eased off around a bend, it slowed like it had knees and intention. The hairs on my arms lifted under my jacket. My jaw locked so tight my teeth hurt. I kept looking for a logical source. Loose trim, a rock caught in the tread, the wind catching a mud flap. But it didn't behave like the truck. It behaved like something matching the truck. I drove faster anyway, pushing into the fog, watching the center line flash past like a heartbeat. The hollows stayed black. The trees stayed close. And outside my passenger door, whatever that sound was, stayed with me. Then finally, the first lights of town appeared ahead. Gas station glow, a handful of porch bulbs, the soft orange wash of street lamps on wet pavement. The sound stopped, not fading, not drifting away. It stopped like someone had stepped back into the dark the moment witnesses became possible. I didn't pull over. I didn't look back. I just drove the last mile home, with my shoulders up around my ears, wondering, quietly, steadily, what I had just chosen not to see. I sat in my driveway for a full minute. After I killed the engine, the rain had thinned into mist. The world was quiet in that Appalachian way. No city hum, just distant creek, rush, and the occasional limb-dripping water onto another limb. My porch light buzzed faintly, throwing a weak circle onto mud and gravel. I should have gone inside. I should have brushed it off as fatigue, but my body wouldn't let me move like it was over. So I got out and walked straight to the passenger side. The air hit my face cold and wet. I clicked on my flashlight, and the beam cut through fog in a pale cone. The truck's paint was slick with rain, reflecting the light back in dull patches. That's when I saw the smear on the passenger door, just above the handle, like a damp sleeve had brushed there. Then higher up, a faint handprint in the condensation along the edge of the window. Not perfectly defined, no horror movie clarity, just the suggestion of fingers, long enough to make my stomach roll. I stood there staring at it, trying to convince myself I'd put it there earlier, trying to remember any moment that night where my hand would have pressed the outside glass. But I'd been in the cab alone. I shined the flashlight down at the mud by the passenger tire. There were prints, not clean tread patterns, but compressed spots where something heavy had stood. The ground was too wet for details, but it was enough to tell me someone had been close to my truck. I moved to the back, light shaking a little now. The tailgate had another smear on the inside edge, like someone had grabbed it. And in the truck bed, my ratchet strap was pulled tight across the toolbox. I hadn't touched that strap in days. The strap wasn't securing anything important. It was just something I left there out of habit. But it had been cinched down neatly, the loose end tucked like whoever tightened it had done it 1,000 times. Something about that, how tidy it was, made my throat close. I climbed up on the bumper and leaned into the bed, shining the light around. That's when I noticed a thin length of wire running along the inside corner, nearly invisible against wet metal. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I hopped down and crouched by the rear axle, sweeping the beam under the truck. There it was. A thin wire looped around the axle housing, twisted tight. The free end was cut short and sharp. I didn't touch it right away. I just stared, rainwater dripping off my hair onto the gravel. The sound on the road, the pacing, the rhythm that matched my speed, suddenly had a simple explanation. Not supernatural, not impossible. A wire can make a truck speak. A wire can make it feel like something is running beside you. Close enough to hear. Close enough to keep time. And the thought that someone might have attached it while I was still inside the cab. Maybe when I slowed, maybe when I hesitated, hit harder than any monster story. Because that meant they'd been close enough to touch the truck. And I never knew. I forced myself to work the wire loose with a pair of pliers from my toolbox. The metal bit into my fingers, even through the cold. When it finally snapped free, the sound was sharp in the quiet yard, like a branch breaking. I threw it into an old coffee can and slammed the lid down too hard. Only then did I notice something tucked behind the toolbox, wedged in the corner where rainwater collects. A small piece of paper, damp and crumpled, stuck to the bed liner. I peeled it free carefully, like it might tear. The handwriting was blocky, pressed hard enough to leave grooves. Only stop once. I read it twice before it landed in my chest. Only stop once. Like the slowdown was the invitation, like whoever stood on that shoulder had been waiting for the moment I chose between being helpful and being safe. I stood in the yard with that note in my palm, feeling heat rise behind my eyes. Not fear exactly. Something uglier, anger at myself for slowing. Shame that I'd been predictable, that my tired kindness could be used like a lever. I went inside and locked the door, then checked the window latches like a person in a different kind of life. I slept on the couch with a lamp on. Every time my house settled, every time the wind pushed against the siding, my body jolted awake. The next morning, daylight tried to make it smaller. The handprint on the glass looked like smudged condensation. The smears could have been mud. The note looked like a prank. The wire looked like trash someone could have picked up anywhere. But the neatness of the strap didn't fit trash. And neither did the timing. I called in late to work and drove my truck to the mechanic in town. An older man who didn't ask too many questions. He crawled under, stared at the axle, then looked up at me with a tired expression like he'd seen too much of rural cruelty. "Somebody messing with you," he said. "Wire like that can make all kinds of noise. Can spook a person bad." I nodded, like I'd expected that. He didn't ask why someone would do it. Out here, people don't always need reasons that make sense. For weeks after, I avoided that stretch of road. I took the longer route through Welch and Wa, burning extra gas, just to stay near lights and houses. I kept my doors locked even when I was alone in the cab. I stopped pulling over for anything at night. Disabled cars, shadows on the shoulder, animals that might still be alive. Then, one afternoon, while cleaning out the truck, I found a photo wedged behind the passenger seat, stuck between the carpet and the metal frame. Black and white, cheap print, nighttime, grainy. It showed that exact curve by the creek, the guardrail, the pull-off, the wet shine of the road, and on the shoulder, a hunched figure. In the bottom corner of the photo, blurred but recognizable, were headlights. Two pale ovals cutting into fog. My headlights. I sat in my driveway holding that photo until my fingers went numb. The mountains around my house looked ordinary in daylight. Trees, ridges, the quiet life I'd always known. But that photo did something my brain couldn't argue with. It told me the person on that shoulder hadn't been random. They'd been waiting in a place where stopping feels like the right thing to do. They'd been ready for the sound of my tires slowing in wet gravel. And I still don't know what would have happened if I'd stopped, if I'd rolled down my window, if I'd stepped out into fog that swallows sound. That's what stays with me. Not a monster, not a legend. Just the thought of a human being out there, using patience in the dark like tools. Learning how people behave, testing what kindness costs, and leaving behind only enough proof to make you doubt yourself in daylight. Some nights, when rain is coming down, gentle and steady, and fog is filling the hollows, I'll catch myself driving a little faster than I need to. And I'll keep my eyes straight ahead, because I learned something on that road that I didn't want to learn. The mountains don't have to chase you. They just have to give someone the perfect place to wait. I didn't move to the mountains because I wanted a fresh start. I moved because the job was there. And the kind of work I do doesn't ask if you're lonely before it sends you somewhere quiet. It was a short-term contract. Site inspections for a utility project. Out near the edge of Wise County, close enough to the line that locals talked about the reservation the way they talked about weather. Not with hostility, just with the careful distance people use when they don't feel like explaining history. The rental I found was a small house tucked into a fold of hills outside St. Paul. One-lane road, no street lights, a mailbox that leaned like it had given up. The house had been nice once. You could tell by the scallop trim around the porch and the way the front windows were framed. But age had done what age does. The paint had bubbled and peeled. The steps creaked under your weight like they were thinking about it. The yard was mostly dirt and moss, and the fence along the back looked like it was only standing because it hadn't decided to fall yet. Inside, the air carried a damp smell that never fully left. Wet wood, a hint of mold in the corners, and that old house odor like dust trapped in boards. The living room still had furniture. The landlord said he couldn't be bothered hauling. A sagging recliner with a cigarette burn in one arm. A coffee table warped by water rings. In the hallway, there was a framed photo that didn't match anything else. A faded picture of a little church with a sign out front that read Hollow Springs. Someone had taken it down, then put it back up crooked, like they couldn't decide if it belonged. My first night there, I slept badly. Not because I was scared, because the quiet was too clean. Back home, you always have a little hum. Traffic, neighbors, a TV through a wall. Here, after 10 o'clock, the world seemed to shut off. No cars, no voices. Just the low, constant sound of insects outside and the occasional creak of the house settling into itself. I could hear my own breathing, and that made me feel too present in my own body. In the mornings, fog would sit in the hollows like spilled milk. It wrapped the trees and made the road look unfinished. On my drive to work, I passed old cabins with tin roofs collapsed in, porches bowed under rot. A child's plastic slide bleached white in a yard where no child lived. Everything out there looked paused, like the mountains had taken a breath and never let it go. My nearest neighbor was a man named Dale, maybe late 50s, thick hands, quiet eyes. His house sat across the narrow road, set back behind a line of rhododendron. The first time I met him, he was splitting wood in the yard like it was something he could do without thinking. He nodded when I introduced myself. "You're in the rental," he said, not a question. "Yeah," I told him. "Just for work." He looked at my truck, then at the fog lying low in the trees. "Road gets slick after dark. Deer don't care what you're doing." That was the closest thing to conversation he offered, but over the next week, he did small neighbor things. Left a bundle of kindling on my porch once, pointed at my sagging gutter, and said, "That'll leak into your wall if you don't watch it." Always practical, always brief. I liked that. I didn't want new friendships. I wanted to do the job, collect the check, go home. The house had odd little details I tried not to think too hard about. The back door had 2 locks, one newer than the other, like someone had added it after something happened. In the kitchen drawer, under a mess of mismatched utensils, I found a ring of keys that didn't fit anything in the house. Old brass keys, worn smooth, tagged with numbers written in faded marker. And on the top shelf of the hall closet, behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets, there was a spiral notebook. I didn't open it at first. It felt too personal, like finding someone's diary. But I was alone, and the nights were long, and curiosity is a quiet kind of hunger. The notebook wasn't a diary. It was lists, short repetitive notes in blocky handwriting. "Lock back door. Don't answer after dark. If it's Dale, he'll come around front. If it's not Dale, don't open the curtain." The last one made me laugh under my breath. Not because it was funny, but because it was so specific, it felt like a superstition pretending to be advice. I told myself the previous tenant had been paranoid. Or maybe someone had messed with them. People mess with newcomers in rural towns sometimes. It's not always mean. Sometimes it's boredom with teeth. Still that night, I found myself checking the locks twice before bed. Rain came in around dusk, a steady hiss on the roof that made the house feel even more sealed. I ate dinner out of a microwave tray standing at the counter, listening to the refrigerator hum and the occasional drip from my bad gutter. It was around 9 when I heard someone outside. Not footsteps exactly, more like the soft crunch of gravel in the driveway, slow and careful. My first instinct was to look out the window. My second was to remember the notebook line about curtains. I stood in the dim living room with the lamp off, watching the dark window like it might blink first. Then a voice came from outside, low and familiar. "Hey, Mark?" My name, said the way Dale said it when he'd asked once if the mailman had been by. The right pitch, the right gravel in the throat. It should have been comforting. But the tone was wrong. Too flat, too careful. Like someone had learned the sound, but not the intention behind it. "Mark," the voice said again, closer now. "Need a hand. Come out here a second." The words felt rehearsed, like a sentence someone had practiced in their mouth. I took a step toward the window anyway, drawn by reflex. The glass was fogged around the edges from warmth inside meeting cold outside, turning the night into a smeared reflection. My own face hovered pale in it, eyes too wide. "Mark," the voice said softly, "please," I fell. There was no panic in it, no pain, just imitation of urgency. My stomach tightened. I reached out and lifted the curtain a half-inch, just enough to peek. The yard was empty. Rain slicked the dirt. The driveway shone dark. No figure, no flashlight beam, no movement. But in the wet dirt below the front window, a line of footprints led straight up to the glass. Not boot prints like mine, bare footprints. Long, pressed deep in the mud, toes splayed slightly like someone had been standing with weight forward, close enough that their breath could have fogged the pain. The footprints stopped directly beneath the window, like whoever made them had walked up, stood there, and then ceased to exist as far as the ground was concerned. The voice outside went silent. I stood there, holding the curtain, my hands shaking slightly, hearing only rain and my own breath. And in that quiet, I understood something simple and awful. It wasn't calling me because it needed help. It was calling me because it wanted to see if I'd come. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lamp on, boots still on my feet, listening to the house creak and the rain work on the roof like patient fingers. Around midnight, the wind rose and the branches scraped the siding. Every scrape sounded like a hand testing the wall. The quiet between gusts felt heavy with expectation. At dawn, fog filled the yard so thick it erased the fence line. The footprints were still there in the mud, softened by rain, but visible enough to make my stomach turn again. I opened the front door a crack and stared at them from the threshold, unwilling to step outside like the yard belonged to something else now. They were too clean to be a prank, too close, too intimate. Someone had walked right up to my window in the dark and called my name, using a voice that sounded like my neighbor. I crossed the road around 8, needing daylight and another human presence to make my brain feel less slippery. Dale was in his yard again, stacking split logs under the lean-to. His dog watched me with tired eyes, tail still. I tried to keep my voice casual. "Did you come over last night?" He didn't look up right away. "No," he said. "Simple. I heard you calling me." That got his attention. He set the log down slowly and wiped his hands on his jeans. "From outside your window?" I nodded, and the way his face tightened made my skin go cold. He walked to the edge of his yard, eyes scanning the fog like he expected it to answer. "You opened the door?" "No." "Good." He said it the same way you say good to someone who didn't touch a downed power line. "You see anything?" "Footprints," I admitted, "in the dirt, right up to the glass." Dale's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "You got a back porch light?" "Yeah." "Keep it on, all night. And if you hear my voice again, you don't answer it. You call me. You call the sheriff. You do not go outside." I stared at him. "What is it?" He hesitated long enough that the fog seemed to thicken between us. "People," he said finally. "It's people. That's all it ever is." He glanced toward the woods that dropped behind my rental into a hollow. "Folks get bored. Folks get mean. Folks get strange." He picked up another log and set it on the pile like the conversation was over. But before I could leave, he added quieter, "If I need help, I'm gonna come around front. Knock, and I'm gonna cuss loud enough. You'll know it's real." That night I put every light on in the house like brightness could lock a door. I turned on the porch light and the back light. I kept my phone charged. I laid my truck keys beside the bed like a plan. Around 10, the rain returned, soft and steady. The smell of wet dirt seeped in through the cracks of the old windows. The house felt small, full of corners that could hold sound. I was standing at the kitchen sink when I heard it again. Not outside this time. Inside the house, a voice, low, close, like it had come from the hallway. "Mark?" My blood went cold so fast it made my fingers go numb. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe right. I stared at the black hallway opening where the framed photo of the church hung crooked. "Mark?" the voice said again, softer. "Hey, come here." It sounded like Dale again, but closer to the way I sounded in my own head. Wrong in a subtler way now, like it was adjusting. I backed up slowly until my hip hit the counter edge. My hand found the heavy cast iron skillet I'd left on the stove. It wasn't a weapon. It was just something solid I could hold. The voice didn't move closer. It didn't get louder. It stayed in the hallway, patient. Then I heard a different sound. A soft shuffle, like bare feet on old wood. I swallowed hard and forced myself to step toward the living room, keeping my eyes on the hallway. The lights were on, but the corners still looked shadowed, like they refused to fully participate. I didn't see anyone, but the hall closet door, the one where I'd found the notebook, was open. It had been closed when I checked it earlier. I knew that because I'd put the notebook back and shut the door like I was returning a secret. Now it stood open a few inches, dark inside, blankets visible. And from the closet, barely noticeable under the smell of damp house, came another scent, sharp and sour, like breath trapped in fabric. Like someone had been inside the closet long enough to warm the air. I stepped back, heart hammering, and my heel bumped the coffee table. The old recliner creaked as if someone had shifted in it. I spun my flashlight on instinct, the beam cutting across the room. Nothing. Just furniture, plastic keyring on the kitchen counter, my own reflection in the front window. Then the front window fogged suddenly in a small oval, right at face height, as if someone had exhaled close to it. Not long enough to leave a message. Just long enough to prove proximity. My stomach flipped. I moved to the window, but didn't lift the curtain this time. I didn't need to. A line of bare footprints had appeared in the wet dirt beneath it again. Fresher now, deeper, as if the person had been standing there longer. Shifting weight, waiting for my reaction. The voice came one last time, soft and almost satisfied. "Mark, I know you're in there. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just remember being outside, rain soaking my hair, truck door open, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys once. I drove across the road and leaned on Dale's horn until his porch light came on. He opened the door with a shotgun held low, not pointed, just present. His eyes met mine, and he didn't ask questions. He let me inside. The smell of wood smoke and dog fur hit me like safety. We called the sheriff. A deputy showed up an hour later, tired-eyed, looked around my rental with a flashlight, found nothing but mud and my own fur drying on the floorboards. In daylight, it all became no evidence. But that wasn't the part that broke something in me. It was the notebook. Because when I went back the next afternoon to pack my things, the spiraled notebook was no longer on the closet shelf. In its place was a different one, newer, dry as if it had never been in that damp house. Inside were only 2 lines, written in careful block letters. You looked, you heard it right. I moved out that day, left half my stuff behind. Paid the landlord to keep it. Drove away with my hands locked at 10 and 2. Like if I loosened my grip, the road would disappear. I still live in Appalachia. You don't shake the mountains just because someone taught you a lesson. But I don't sleep with my curtains open anymore. I don't answer voices outside after dark. And sometimes, especially on rainy nights when fog presses up against the glass, I'll hear my name in the quiet of my own house. Not shouted, not threatening, just spoken softly, in a tone that almost understands what it's doing. And the worst part is, my brain still flinches the same way it did that first night, because it remembers how close someone can get without ever needing to come inside. Just beyond the firelight, I hadn't been camping in years before that trip, and I only agreed because it was supposed to be familiar ground. We grew up in eastern Kentucky, not far from the Virginia line, where the Appalachian ridges fold over each other like knuckles. The place we chose sat deep in a hollow, outside a town that barely shows up on maps anymore. An old logging area with a cleared patch near a creek. No cell service, no nearby roads, just forest and the sound of water moving over stone. There were 4 of us. I drove in with Matt and his brother Aaron, and Caleb met us there on his old dirt bike. We set up camp before dark, the air already damp with evening fog. The ground smelled like rotten wet leaves, and every step sank a little into the mud. It felt quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just muted, like the woods were holding something back. The fire took longer than it should have. The wood hissed and smoked, damp from recent rain, and the smoke clung low, stinging my eyes. We talked about nothing important. Work, old stories, how Caleb nearly wrecked on the way in. The normal stuff you say when you're trying to convince yourself everything's fine. Once the fire settled, that's when we started hearing movement. At first, it sounded like deer, branches shifting, leaves crunching somewhere just beyond the circle of light. That wasn't unusual. What bothered me was the weight of it. The sounds came slow and deliberate, not skittish. Whatever it was didn't retreat when we laughed or shifted our chairs. It stayed just far enough back to remain unseen. Matt joked about bears, but his voice didn't quite sell it. Bears don't usually circle. This did. I remember noticing how the firelight cut off sharply. Swallowed by the trees, past that edge, everything felt thick and close. The woods seemed tighter than they had earlier, trunks packed close together, shadows layered on shadows. When the movement stopped, the silence felt worse. We turned in not long after. I crawled into my tent fully dressed, the smell of smoke clinging to my clothes. The ground was cold through the thin pad, and somewhere nearby, the creek kept up its steady, reassuring sound. I told myself that if something was wrong, the others would notice too. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was my name. It was quiet, careful, "Hey," someone whispered. "You awake?" My eyes snapped open. For a second, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the faint orange glow of dying embers through the tent wall. I knew that voice. It sounded like Aaron. "Come here," it said. "I need help with something." I lay there, heart pounding, listening. The voice came again, closer to the tent flap now, low, insistent. I didn't answer. Instead, I rolled slightly and looked toward the opening of my tent. Through the thin fabric, I could see the fire pit, and beside it, the dark outline of a body slumped in a camp chair. Aaron, his head was tilted forward, chin on his chest, completely still. The whisper came again, right outside my tent. This time, it used my name. I stayed frozen, my mouth dry, every instinct telling me not to make a sound. The voice waited, then shifted away, footsteps moving slowly around the edge of the camp, not retreating, circling. Eventually, I must have passed out again, exhaustion pulling me under despite the fear tightening my chest. Morning came gray and damp. Fog hung low over the ground, and the fire pit was nothing but ash and blackened wood. No one mentioned the night sounds at first. We packed up in silence until Caleb finally pointed at the ground near the tents. The tracks were deep, pressed hard into the mud. They looked almost human. Almost. The prints circled the camp in a wide loop, cutting through the mud and leaf litter. They were too large to belong to any of us. Longer than my boot, but narrow. The heel dragged out like the foot had twisted mid-step. The toes were wrong too. Stretched, splayed unevenly, as if whoever made them wasn't used to walking the way they were shaped. No one said much. Matt squatted to look closer, then stood up too fast and brushed his hands on his jeans like he wanted the feeling gone. Aaron kept staring toward the trees, his jaw tight. I told them about the whisper. Aaron laughed once, sharp and quick, and said, "Maybe I dreamed it." Caleb suggested someone could have been messing with us. A local maybe. Hunters pass through those woods sometimes. But nobody looked convinced, not even the ones talking. We left earlier than planned. The hike out felt longer than it had coming in. Every sound seemed amplified. The snap of branches underfoot, the rush of blood in my ears. I kept expecting to see someone standing just off the trail, watching. The woods were brighter in daylight, but that didn't help. It only made the details clearer. Broken saplings bent at strange angles. A scrap of old fabric snagged on a thorn bush, damp and gray with age. None of us suggested coming back. I tried to let it go after that. Told myself it was just nerves and imagination feeding off each other. But the memory didn't fade the way other bad nights do. It stayed sharp, replaying at inconvenient moments, lying in bed, driving home late, hearing my name spoken when no one was there. A few months later, I saw Aaron again at a family cookout. He pulled me aside when no one else was around. He asked if I'd gotten out of my tent that night. I told him no. He nodded slowly, like he'd already expected that answer. Then he said he'd woken up too. Heard someone moving near the fire. Thought it was me. He'd almost called out before he realized the footsteps didn't sound right, too heavy, dragging slightly, like someone favoring a leg. Neither of us mentioned the voice again. I don't camp anymore. Not like that. I avoid remote hollows and places where the trees grow too close together. Sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I still hear my name whispered from just beyond the edge of light, careful, familiar, wrong in ways I can't quite explain. What scares me most isn't that something followed us. It's that whatever it was knew exactly how to sound like one of us and almost convinced me to answer. ChatGPT can make mistakes, check important info.
If today's story touch a quiet corner of your heart, if for a moment you felt like someone was standing close to you, then remember you are not alone. To hear more terrifying whisper in the depth of the night, subscribe to our channel Night Mare Whisper, because every story is not just about fear, it leaves behind a feeling. Thanks for watching. And one more thing, we'll meet again tomorrow night when the darkness has grown a little deeper.